Hello and welcome to Auspol Explained. As always, I'm your ginger curly haired host, David, and today I've gone to the office of Senator Linda Reynolds to discuss what it's like being a minister. What does a minister do? What are the various responsibilities? Let's find out.
Hi, I'm Senator Linda Reynolds. I've been a senator now for the state of Western Australia for nearly 10 years, and nearly 5 of those I was also a minister of the Crown. I had a number of portfolios. I started off as an assistant minister, which for Home Affairs, so I was responsible for disaster management and customs. Then I went on to go into Cabinet, and I became a Cabinet Minister, and I was the Minister for Defence Industry, and then I was the Defence Minister. And then after Defence, I was the Minister for Government Services and also the Minister for the NDIS. So I've had wide-ranging ministerial experience across many different, very different portfolios. But the job of being a minister is very similar in each of the portfolios.
Excellent. Sounds like you've got lots of experience to answer our questions. The first one is the simplest. Broadly speaking, what is a minister?
A minister in our system of government is somebody who's been elected to either the House of Representatives or the Senate and has constitutional responsibilities to represent either the state or the electorate that's elected them, to make laws and to represent their interests. But in addition, in our constitution, our ministers are people who are pulled out of the parliament itself and have what they call executive government responsibilities. So that's actually for government, making policy decisions and then implementing them with the support of the parliament. So it's actually ministers make government happen.
Let's unpack what you mean by government. So, the basic idea is that a majority of members in a party or coalition in the lower house form government, but all those members are part of the government party. But when we're talking about the executive government, the ministers, there is a distinction that is a subset of the sort of government party. Could you explain what's the difference between government being formed as a majority of members versus executive government?
The executive government are those who are responsible for actually delivering government and government services, for making the decisions on entitlements, on health, education, defence, foreign affairs. So it's executive government that performs those roles. And that's different from the parliament because parliamentarians are elected by Australians to represent them in parliament and to make laws and to improve laws, whereas the executive government delivers government services and does all of those other things that people, when they go, the government should do something, that's who is, the executive government is responsible for getting stuff done. So here in Australia, ministers have 2 hats. So when I was a minister, I had 2 of the 3 different constitutional responsibilities. I was elected by the people of Western Australia to represent them in the Senate, and I was also chosen by the Prime Minister to be an executive, a minister, to actually help run the government.
Ministers usually form part of the cabinet. What role does a minister have within the cabinet? How does that affect the decision-making process of a government?
Really good question. So in our system, the Prime Minister is appointed by the Governor-General to form government, and so appoints ministers. So appoints the most senior ministers are cabinet ministers, and each of the ministers has a part of responsibility for the government. So I had at one point responsibility for defence, for emergency management at another time, the NDIS, and also for all of government services. So cabinet ministers are appointed to run those departments and to be accountable for what those departments do. But they're the cabinet ministers, and so cabinet ministers come together as cabinet, and then we make the big decisions on what the government's going to do and what legislation we put to the House of Reps and the Senate. So they make the big decisions about government, but then there's also other ministers appointed. So, something like defence is a really big portfolio. So more junior ministers and assistant ministers are appointed to help the cabinet minister deliver on those responsibilities.
What influence does an individual minister have over government policy? So you've got an area of responsibility, but cabinet is a sort of collective body. So basically, what's the distinction between individual discretion versus collective agreement?
Well, I guess the answer is as much or as little as the person has the capacity to achieve. So the more persuasive and the more knowledgeable a cabinet minister is, the more influence they can have within cabinet to get cabinet to agree to the funding they want and to agree to the legislation they want and the big changes they want to make to their department. So, for example, when I was the Minister for Defence, I worked with my department, I directed my department to produce a number of strategic documents, budgeting documents, capability documents, but then I have to put them to the Cabinet and the National Security Committee of Cabinet to get them to approve not only the policy, but also to give me the money from the budget that I needed to deliver that policy. You can be a minister who has little impact on your department, which I don't think is a good thing, because the department is accountable to you and the government of the day. So they are there to provide you with advice on what is legal, what is possible, the best ways to deliver a particular program. But ultimately, ministers are accountable to the Parliament and to the people of Australia for good government.
You're mentioning a lot about government departments. Could you elaborate on what a minister's responsibility in relation to a government department is and how much influence they have over how it is run?
The minister is the person who is accountable to the Prime Minister and to the people of Australia for the delivery of those services. So say if it's defence or if it's health or if it's education, they are responsible for making sure that what has been agreed to be delivered is delivered, and also to make sure that the departments are according with the law and delivering programs as expected. So it could be welfare programs, it could be health programs, it could be the defence of our nation. So each of the departments also has a secretary who is a public servant, and he is the one responsible for the day-to-day management of departments, and they also have a lot of legislative responsibilities to deliver on what defence is required to deliver, or government services or health, education, environment. So that is the head public servant in that department, and they are accountable to the minister. So a good minister, I believe, takes the department's advice, seeks their advice, takes their advice, but then gives them directions about what the government of the day wants them to deliver.
Speaking of that advice, how does a minister rely on the advice from the public sector to influence their decisions and be responsible about how they manage those departments?
Well, a good minister will take and understand what their party has promised, for example, at the last election, and then work through with the department how it can be implemented legally, what sort of legislation is required, and what other sort of regulations are required to successfully get that through the Parliament, because obviously a lot of these programs need parliamentary approval and scrutiny, which is a very important part of the Senate in particular. So it's actually making sure that that is done legally, it's done effectively through the Parliament, which often means the minister has to negotiate with parliamentarians of all sides to get support for the legislation or for amendments. So the department is there to assist and advise ministers and governments of the day on how to deliver good government. But again, it's there to advise and to develop the policies that the government want on behalf of the people of Australia.
So when we're talking about the public sector and these departments and the head of them advising ministers, these are people who sort of stay in this job for quite a long time, regardless of who is in government. Is the minister that changes based off election results and their relationship changes, correct?
Yes, ministers are elected by the people of Australia to represent them in the Parliament, and then if their side forms government, they can be selected by the Prime Minister and appointed by the Governor-General as a Minister of the Crown. And that means that the public servants, when you think about it, the word it's public servants, are there to support executive government to deliver those services. So as you said, they're highly educated subject matter experts, but ultimately they're not elected by the people. MPs are, members and senators are, and then they're appointed as ministers, and they are responsible to the Crown because they're appointed by the Governor-General. So ultimately the responsibility rests with those of us who've been elected to represent people.
So, a minister has a lot of duties, not just managing those departments, but also introducing legislation relevant to their portfolio. So could you give us an overview of what the process is like for a minister introducing government legislation?
These days it can be quite tricky because we've got lots of different parties and independents in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the minister is responsible for making sure the legislation is drafted, taking it through their own political parties, what we call the party room, to get their own side of politics approval for the legislation. And then it's introduced either in the House of Reps or the Senate. And then it goes through the relevant parliamentary processes. There's quite a bit of scrutiny. Quite often your bill will be sent to a Senate committee for review, for public review and analysis. And so ministers have to engage with that process, work out, do they agree with what the Parliament, in this case the Senate usually, has recommended? And then they've got to negotiate with other parties to get support for the legislation. So sometimes that can take a matter of days, and sometimes it can take a matter, months to go through that process. So it can be a lot of negotiation.
Speaking of that negotiation, sometimes to get support to pass a bill, you need amendments.
You do.
So what role does a minister have in negotiating and accepting or rejecting proposed amendments by the opposition or crossbench to get that support?
Any member or senator can make amendments in the various stages of the bill, particularly in the second, what they call the second reading, or in the Senate in the committee stage. So any member or senator can make propose amendments on the floor, or generally what will happen is there'll be discussions. So good ministers will have discussions not just with their own side, but with the Labor Party and the crossbench early on, and to get an idea of if they're supportive of the legislation, or if another party is going to move an amendment. Do we agree with it? Do we not agree with it? If we do agree with it, we can either amend the bill through our own amendments, or we can agree to support other parties' amendments. So that can happen, and that happens all the time, to make the bill a better bill, but also to make it a bill that the Parliament will accept and will adopt.
You've mentioned scrutiny a lot throughout this interview. A key role of Parliament is to scrutinise the actions of government. How do they do that? What are the various mechanisms for scrutiny?
There's a lot of ways that issues can be scrutinised, and also legislation. So for example, in the Senate, we have two lots of committees. So we have legislative committees that legislation is referred to, so that we have public hearings, senators get to scrutinise the bill, we get, any member of the public or interest groups can make submissions on the bill. We agree with it, we don't agree with it, we think it needs amendments, or you haven't considered this or that. And then the Senate committee will produce a report on the bill for the government to consider, so that they can then say, yes, we agree with that, no, we don't, yes, we do, and make some amendments. Or if not, other senators can make amendments, and they'll get through if they've got the numbers in the Senate, and then back in the House of Representatives. But there's also another series of committees in the Senate called references committees, and they can look into pretty much any issue that the Senate agrees is important to look into. So any particular issue. So I've been involved in committees that have looked at everything from agricultural levies to currently the Perth Mint, looking at artificial intelligence now, looking at how Australia responds to natural disasters, so into defence, issues. So we look at and we scrutinise many different issues. So some of the recommendations we will make will go back to executive government for them to consider, and some of it will be for other departments or agencies to consider implementing through their minister. So they're important committees, but it is such an important process because it's all about democracy. It's about scrutinising legislation, making sure it's as good as it can be, and that it is transparent, and that if there's ways that members of the public and also other senators and members think it can be improved, those amendments are made.
Expanding on this sort of committee scrutiny, committees are made up of backbenchers, members who aren't part of the executive from various different parties, and they table reports to sort of recommend action to ministers. Let's unpack committees just a little bit more.
So for parliamentary committees, there's three main types. There's committees that are made up just of members of the House of Representatives, committees that are made up just of senators, and then joint committees that have both. And the committees will always be made up of some Labor, some Liberal, and generally more and more crossbenchers are on these committees. And we do a whole variety of things. All of the committee deliberations, submissions, and their reports are available to any member of the public. And they're really important because it gives the Parliament on behalf of Australians the opportunity to have their say on big issues that the Parliament is considering. The first step is we put a notice of the committee out into the public. We call for submissions, we review the submissions, we have hearings, which are almost always public, unless there's something really private or confidential or a legal matter that shouldn't be in public. And then we write a report based on all of the submissions that we've had, based on our own judgment and experience as well. So there's a committee report. Sometimes there's dissenting reports or additional comments in those from individual members or senators on the committee. And then that is tabled in the Parliament. So we'll table either in the House of Representatives or the Senate, or sometimes both if they're joint reports. And then any senator gets the opportunity to speak about those reports. And the government then has to do a response back to the Parliament on the findings and the recommendations in the report. So sometimes they're not actioned as much as the Parliament would like, but as individual parliamentarians we can then go and chase those reports up or lobby to get more of it implemented. So one example, there's hundreds of reports tabled every year on pretty much anything you could possibly think of, important issues in Australia. But one example that I'm particularly proud of is, for many years I've been very passionate about anti-slavery, and it's called Modern Slavery Today. So myself and some other parliamentarians were in a committee. We wanted the Parliament to have a look at whether Australia should have a Modern Slavery Act and follow from particularly the UK that had implemented that. So we had a 12-month inquiry. We heard from hundreds of people, had hundreds of submissions from people in Australia and overseas, and we recommended the Australian government implement modern slavery legislation, and that companies should report, big companies should report on slavery in their supply chains. Because ultimately 50 million people today are enslaved globally. And quite often we buy products and use services, but not knowing that slave labour has gone into that. So the government accepted that recommendation, and by that stage I was the Assistant Minister for Home Affairs. So I then got to take that legislation that I'd recommended as a parliamentarian. I got to take that through that whole parliamentary process of having it drafted, going through a committee process, and then doing all the trading with Labor and the Greens to get it in a form that everybody could agree to it in the Senate. And I did that, and I'm now very proud that we have some of the best anti-slavery legislation in the world. So that's how it started, with a few people who were passionate. We had a parliamentary committee hearing into it, a report. Government then implemented the recommendations, and we're now just reviewing it for the second, to make amendments to that legislation now.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add about the role of a minister?
It's one of the greatest responsibilities and privileges that any Australian can ever have. Not only being a representative, being elected by, in my case, by the people of Western Australia, to represent them and to undertake the responsibilities of a senator, but also being a minister. And being a Minister for Defence, or the NDIS, or Government Services, comes with great responsibility. And you have to have a very clear idea of what you want to achieve as that minister, and also then how you can get things done, and get things done so that you leave it better than you came to the portfolio. Being a minister, you will never keep everybody happy, because on just about anything there's such a diversity of points of view. So when you go to take a decision, there'll be one group in the community who love it, and there'll be another group who hate it, and then there'll be people in the community who are ambivalent. So also being a minister is a matter of how do you juggle all of those competing interests and points of view to actually make sure that you can deliver an outcome, because quite often you make decisions that not everybody is happy with, but you have to make decisions, and then you have to fight to have those decisions implemented, and just accept that nobody will, you will never have everybody happy with every decision you've made, but you have to have the confidence in yourself that you can take the decisions and move on to get them implemented. And that's not always easy in life.
Thank you very much for your time
You're
and
very
expertise.
welcome. Thank you, you too. And I'd encourage anybody out there who's thinking about serving their communities and the Australian people, whatever your ideology is, whatever you believe, give it a go. Find out more about it, and there is no greater privilege and there's no greater joy.
Wonderful. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that interview. Don't forget to share, subscribe if you're not already. Comment down below what you would like to learn about next. Thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon, and I will see you next time.